Hey everybody, this is Allan Ting, TEDx speaker, #1 best-selling author. And today's topic in our expert series interview is about healing the past and nurturing the future. So really about how to inspire our children and raise your parenting level to a whole new level. And today we have an amazing guest, Chris Lolies. He and I actually met a couple of weeks ago at a youth leadership event. And he and I both serve as a captain. And the reason why I bring this to our show or interview is because this man is such an amazing person, because not only he gives from his heart, he has so much presence, and I see him working with other team members and working with the teens, and he brings so much love. So I had a chance to sit down with him during lunch, and he and I just kind of start talking, and turns out that he used to work at Amazon at AWS. He was a senior partner in business for dev managers for about 11 years. And then what's really phenomenal is that he had a higher calling, and he felt like he wanted to make a difference in people's lives, both individually and companies. So he became a systematic family and systematic constellation facilitator. So we can ask him more about that, what that directly means. But what it is he's an expert in systemic leadership principles. And this is where he identified what's holding people back. What's their limiting belief, what's their ceiling, and really help them find their greatness. So with that said, I'd like to welcome our special guest, Chris. How you doing?
Great. Thank you, Allan, for the lovely introduction.
Appreciate it. So let's go ahead and dive right in. You know, we as parents can get really frustrated at times with our children, right? What we do is we lose our patience, because that never happens. So this is when we feel like angry, anxious, irritated, and maybe sometimes even depressed after we unleash at our children. So why do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I want to honor all parents out there that have taken on the responsibility to raise a child in this world. And every day I thank my parents. I have not always had the best experience growing up, but, they needed to be the exact parents they were for me to be the person that I am here today. I understand we want the best for children growing up, and frustrations, I think from a systemic view, the way we like to think about things or frustrations is to look at these frustrations as symptoms potentially that are interconnected with other issues maybe from the past. And so when we look at frustrations from a systemic perspective, we ask ourselves, is this a pattern? Has this happened before? And how is this potentially connected with, other parts or history potentially? So frustration is absolutely understandable. It's just a question of how do we choose to look at this frustration? Do we look at it from an empowering way, or do we look at it from in the moment, I need something changed?
Yeah, that's a great answer to that, because one of the parents I work with, she said that when her son doesn't listen to her and when her daughter doesn't listen to her, she feels very disrespected. And oftentimes I'm hearing this over and over, including myself. Like, if I did that to my parents when I was younger, I would have got a beating, right? Or I would get timeout, or I would get, grounded and things like that. I can't believe how my children are getting away with murder today. So when you talk about reflection, right, this is where the reflection comes in. So when our children triggers us, meaning that we get into this heightened emotional state, maybe it's not what they're doing to us. Maybe it's a trigger that's coming from our parents and how we were brought up. What do you think about that?
Yes, absolutely. And I think the first question is to ask, are there still things that potentially is to go internally and understand what's my relationship with my parents today, and what was the relationship with my parents growing up when I was that specific age? So, because potentially what happens is that we're potentially just bringing it forward of how we were raised and the type of tone and the type of approach that was used with us. Those are the tools we like to reach to sometimes when we're tired. We have evolved, but sometimes when we're tired, we forget our evolution and we react to the things that we were used to growing up. But I think, look from a systemic perspective, triggers are amazing because they are hints. They're hints to something that hasn't been resolved yet. They're a breadcrumb trail, if you wish, right, of things that maybe are still not fully resolved in our hearts yet that we're still passing on. So in systemic perspective, we love triggers and we start recognizing them quicker, and we take a step back and zoom out and go, okay, I was triggered here. What does this mean in terms of stuff that's not resolved fully behind me? And do I want to continue to have this trigger going forward? Because we are the keepers of the gate. We can stop it here.
So can you talk more about triggers? I mean, you and I both are pretty familiar with this since we do a lot of trauma work, right? For our audiences, haven't really tapped into psychology and really understand triggers. Can you briefly explain what trigger is and how do we know we have a trigger?
Yes. Triggers can come in different forms. It's usually an emotional reaction and a heightened emotional reaction that you just mentioned as well to something, to a behavior, to a reaction. And so when this trigger happens, there's a lot of things that happen in the brain and in the nervous system. And we can go into fight, flight, freeze, for example. And it can be very difficult for us to downregulate. Also, depending on our history, do we grow up in a safe environment, for example? But a trigger is anything that really emotionally brings you outside of a homeostasis kind of level. And that's how I would describe a trigger.
Yeah, I remember one psychiatrist I worked with, this is before I had kids, he would say that when you do have kids, they're the best thing in the world because they're also here to help you learn. So essentially, they're our teachers. And he was talking about one time when his trigger got pulled was when his wife was away and he was helping his daughter brushing her teeth. And she's like, that's not how mom does it. And he got so upset because, like, what am I doing wrong? Like, this is the correct way of brushing your teeth. Mom and I might have differences in our brushing our teeth, but I am still right. So he got triggered and he got angry and he kind of just went outlash on her daughter, and then her daughter just starts crying, right? And he felt so bad. So I love what you're talking about so far because this is exactly what triggers are, right?
Yes.
So let's start moving on forward our conversation. How does this trigger happen? I'm assuming that we learned this where we were triggered from our parents and from our parents and from their parents and on and on. And there's a term called intergenerational trauma. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes. So intergenerational trauma is the term for unresolved trauma that has been passed on through the generations. And we see this in families all the time. Where there's one generation that trauma, and in certain parts in the world we've had many wars not so long ago, right? And a lot of times if this type of trauma from those circumstances is not dealt with, then a lot of times it's not spoken about, for example. It's pushed down, and this trauma comes out in different types of behaviors, maybe in attachment types that these people have in terms of relationships with other human beings. There's a whole scope of ways how trauma can be passed on, but what we also see scientifically is that, have you heard of Bruce Lipton?
I have.
Yeah. So Bruce Lipton actually brought an interesting research not so long ago, where they scientifically have shown that when your grandmother had your mother in her womb at a 5-month-old embryo, so your mom was a 5-month-old embryo in your grandmother, she would have developed the cells for you already. So at a cellular level, at that time, you're already exposed to the environment that your grandmother and your mom as a 5-month-old embryo were exposed to. All her emotions, the entire environment that she's in, right? So we're going back many, many years. We're already at a cellular level. We were exposed to toxic environments potentially, right? So that's one piece. And then never mind the other type of trauma that can be passed on in different ways through DNA markers, epigenetics. So yeah, intergenerational trauma is trauma passed from one generation to another, and a lot of times it's many generations.